everyone, and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. It is 2018 now, which I realize it also was last week, but it's actually 2018 at the time of recording. So not just the time that you're hearing this. So we're still kind of, it's January 1st. We've already abandoned all of our New Year's resolutions. We've already gained back the 40 pounds that we lost at the gym this morning. And so, but of anything, we're willing to throw our own personal health and our own aspirational goals to the wind, but we won't let down our our weird little podcast project that we've, against all odds, maintained for just over half a year now. We've just hit that landmark kind of earlier last month. So let's go 2018. It's the year of Playwright, the year that we're finally going to break through the big time and see where we can take it. Anyways, my name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q. And H, we are 2018. We're sacrificing our time, our bodies,
and our children.
Our children. They're going to be sort of held over a pit that we've constructed. And, I don't want to get into too much detail because there's obviously legal implications there.
Well, they say that the most important part of the creative process is being able to kill your babies. So I feel like as a creative podcast, we have to lead by example.
It's time to kill those babies. We have to first make the babies. And then just get rid of them. Why did we make them in the first place?
Seems like there's too many already. What are we doing?
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad we are getting into this. This is horrible, but you know what? New rule, 2018. If you are a couple
new rules.
That's right, new rules. If you are a couple of people thinking about having a child, you're allowed 1, 2 at max. That's a replacement of your carbon footprint. And then no more. I am tired of sitting in traffic. I'm tired of fighting people at getting tickets to movies and going to restaurants. This is a good way for us to really pare down and be lean and mean going into the new decade.
And for all of our listeners in China, just kind of keep on doing what you're doing. You've got it. You've got it down.
Crushing it, aren't they? China is crushing it.
And enjoy all of your Tencent games that seem to be making buku bucks in your market.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Speaking of games, let's go ahead and pitch some of our own. We're moving into a new year, so you've actually had quite a few weeks of absence from the podcast. Not only were you replaced by a guest last week because you were on vacation, but you also recorded the week previous a few weeks in advance. So you've been, on vacation, being able to clear your mind and take in new experiences and ideas. So I expect this one to be just as fresh as anything you've ever pitched before.
Well, you're going to be disappointed.
But disappoint me in the best possible way. Okay.
So my pitch to you this week, H, is I would like to have a Dark Souls-esque 2-player co-op fighting game. So imagine you are negotiating and moving through the world. I think a game that came out recently called Absolver did something like this, where you're kind of moving around in a Dark Souls-like way, encountering bad guys and people to fight. Maybe the moveset isn't quite as complex as Absolver, but it's you and a friend on this journey together, and actually the AI that you encounter is able to sort of karate both of you at the same time and handle 2 opponents at once. Maybe there's even world events where multiple teams have to come together and all fight one particular bad guy. Originally, this pitch was going to be something I attached a franchise to. So I was going to make this a Mortal Kombat, a really interesting reboot of the original Mortal Kombat idea. But then I started thinking about it in Tekken and Street Fighter-like fictions, and it seemed just as interesting to me. So maybe we apply one of those, maybe we don't, but that is the nature of Playwright. So that's my pitch.
All right, let's start the clock. Yeah, so between Absolver, as you've mentioned, and then For Honor of last year, those both seem to fit the Dark Souls, but multiplayer fighting game type of niches. And so I'm kind of not really fully grasping what it is at this point, what kind of hole you're seeing that needs to be filled. What is this going to be doing that's different than the ones that we've seen from the last couple of years?
Well, when I originally started thinking of it through the lens of Mortal Kombat, I was thinking specifically how it goes beyond simply a short range game of like approaching the enemy and actually having a like slow paced punch kick block system. Whereas like in a lot of games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, there's a lot of projectiles happening. So like a magic spell in Dark Souls, I think there's interesting things you could do from a long range perspective, depending on what your abilities are. And the idea of fatalities obviously coming into, or especially environmental fatalities coming into the mix, where perhaps you're fighting in a precarious location and then you find yourself able to, kick an enemy straight into a wall of spikes to murder them would be really interesting. I think it moment to moment might feel similar to Absolver, but I was thinking more along the lines of what could a long or medium range sort of experience be, and what kind of interesting things could you do from an environmental destruction standpoint?
Okay, to kind of put down a couple of touch points for the conversation. There are 2D fighting games that take place in a 3D plane, like you see the Soul Caliburs or the Virtua Fighters or Tekkens, which gives you a little bit of sidestepping ability. It's not the same thing as something that's fully 3D, like a Power Stone would be a good touch point for that, which is a little bit more of like almost like a top-down bird's eye perspective of a battlefield, or like a 3/4 perspective. But as I've been thinking about Super Smash Bros. A lot lately.
Oh, wow.
And, because I'm a huge fan of that franchise and I'm just kind of dying for it to come back to the Switch. And I've been thinking about like different ways that franchise can grow and evolve. And I was thinking like maybe it could transition from a 2D fighter into like a 3D fighter, kind of like a Power Stone. But then as I got to thinking more about how that would all work, I realized that the kind of complex button inputs that you use in fighting games, the kind of quarter circles, and even the, there's a lot of like up B combinations in Smash Bros. Even stuff as simple as that would take on an entirely different meaning, so to speak, in a 3D arena. You wouldn't have, because you need all 360 degrees of the thumbstick to be a representative of a positional coordinate as your character kind of rotates around. So you wouldn't be able to necessarily send a fireball with the same command that you would in Street Fighter and expect it to go in the direction that you want it to.
Right.
Unless you got really clever with those button combinations. So I'm interested in exploring ways to account for that that perhaps control deficiency while still setting this in a truly 3D environment.
Yeah, so obviously that last line I think makes the big difference there, because the cheat that you could apply immediately is you're navigating a space, perhaps collecting upgrades or surviving gauntlets in a 3D space, and then all of a sudden, when you approach an opponent, you find yourself in a more camera-locked 2D fighting game experience, which something like Absolver doesn't do, and For Honor doesn't do, but I think is valid and an interesting way to approach that. Especially, it would be interesting for me to see, fighting games seem so locked into stages, and to have those stages feel more like the Soulsian interconnected map that is looping in on itself, I think is very interesting. Or, Mortal Kombat's always had the concept of a sort of tower that is being climbed. And so for descending parts of the tower, or rather ascending parts of the tower, you're, encountering these different enemies on your way. There was a game, it is probably not very well known called Distrega.
Okay.
And Distrega was an old PlayStation 1 fighting game that allowed you to sort of run around in a 3D environment. It was kind of a very large battlefield, and it was almost entirely a long-range based fighting game. In fact, you're spending most of the match throwing projectiles at each other and sort of dodging each other's projectiles. And that kind of all ended with, depending on the attack, there was some level of homing that it would do. And if you actually go and look at gameplay, you can see that you're actually a little bit more able to do things like jump and dodge things in a way that maybe you wouldn't in a traditional 2D fighter.
Yeah, I think the most successful implementation of a 3D fighting system that I've seen in the past, even though the games and their mechanics are pretty simplistic by fighting game standards, are the Naruto fighting games, the Naruto Shippuden or whatever they are. Those play kind of like an over-the-shoulder fighting game almost, a little bit zoomed back from that, but it's following one character primarily and then keeping the other player or the other character kind of in the background, but you can still see both characters. It's very cinematically angled, all of the cameras. It follows the action really well, and it's really easy for both players to play, even though the camera is following one player primarily. Like, it keeps both on screen, and so it's really easy for both of them to... no one feels like they're at a disadvantage just because the camera's behind one of them. And so that's one way to do it. The Pokken fighting games, the Bandai Namco produced Pokemon fighting games in the Tekken house, are similar to that, although they shift into 2D fighting games if you activate some sort of a phase switch in battles, which can be easily switched in and out between 3D and 2D fights. So there are ways to manage it.
I would even love to see one of the things that you usually don't get in the traditional fighting games is the ability to have some level of persistence between matches. We've all gotten out of a match maybe by the skin of our teeth. And generally, unless it's a specific mode dedicated to this, I think Smash Brothers has done this before in the past with like continuing characters coming into the stage, and your health is just getting, or your percentage is just getting higher and higher. But the ability that between matches you actually have to deal with the amount of health that you've lost, or you're finding upgrades and collectibles outside of matches that you're carrying into matches with you. Like, what would a Street Fighter look like if one person was able to use something like a health potion in the middle of it? I think that would be a different dynamic, and that would allow for bad guys to feel, opponents to feel more difficult. And the game kind of expects you to have more items at your disposal than just simply the traditional set of fighting moves, if you will.
Let's try to really kind of hone in on what makes this idea unique. And I think that's the kind of contiguous environment that you're fighting in, this kind of Dark Souls-y type of environment, this world that is continually like an adapting battlefield. And there's a few even fights in the Dark Souls games that take place in a very large battlefield. Like the final fight of the final DLC of Dark Souls 3 takes place in this huge arena full of hills and flat plains, and so there's really a lot of ways that you can use elevation to your favor. There's a lot of ways that you can set up interesting battle arenas based on where in this world you choose to go. So I think there's a lot of potential in that to set up for some interesting fights, almost like how Nidhogg gets some cool kind of procedural story-making moments going on in just very simple mechanics, very simple setup, but throwing in just enough of a environmental difference to change the dynamics of a fight.
When I think about that, sort of, if you have a persistent environment and you can do things like environmental destruction, or perhaps there's a fight that the opponent that you were fighting was able to destroy a piece of, platform or geometry that is really would have been very helpful for you to be successful in your next fight. Or likewise, you're destroying them in such a way, my earlier example of tossing someone against the spikes, now that environment has been altered, right? There's, it's not, the spikes are not as deep. You can't actually toss just unlimited people on spikes if you're dealing with the persistence of the world. When you talk about this Dark Souls sort of open battlefield fight, how does the battlefield affect that particular, outside of just like dodging and negotiating around it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I love the idea of dodging and blocking projectiles in the environment. The ability to dive and duck behind something, I think would be really, really neat.
Right. In that particular case, since the enemy that you're fighting is fairly agile, and he can jump for long reaches of space, is not quite as satisfying as it would be fighting something that's kind of your equal in skills and capabilities.
Yeah.
But, it does give you a certain amount of agency over, if you're more comfortable fighting in a flat playing space, if you're more comfortable keeping in a higher ground on your enemy, and it gives you some choice in where you fight this boss, which a lot of Dark Souls enemies don't really allow you that opportunity.
Yeah, I just wanted to have, I think what no fighting game has ever done for me is feel like it represents the breadth of cinematic fighting arenas that are encountered typically in movies. Like, I would love to have a game that has fights in it that feel like, like an open gambling casino where people are jumping on tables and stuff.
Yeah.
And
like some Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, like even a multi-tiered, like a 2 or 3 story house or something.
Exactly. And then you have great stuff like one of my favorite sort of martial arts films is Ong Bak. And Ip Man, and those are movies where there's a lot of different places that fights are happening, and sometimes they're in sections of this game. Potentially there are, you're in a circle pit and there's just guy after guy coming out of this pit to challenge you. And then likewise you can square that against something like in the Matrix, the sort of subway fights where people are running off of walls and environments. So I think maybe, if you take the combat of fighting, and probably this will upset true fighting game fans, but simplify it in a way where, some level of punch and kicks are connecting with just a couple buttons, and you can use other buttons for more environmental interaction, whether that's running on the sides if you have enough momentum, or, jumping, or even destroying pieces of environment. That could be more interesting than just the simple, run up to some guy and then engage in what is a traditional fighting experience.
Well, kind of genre-wide, the entire fighting game genre has been getting a lot more simple and accessible. So you might not be a million miles off on that one. But as much as I feel like we've just kind of scratched the surface of this, we are out of time on that. So we have to seal up that book and give it a name.
I'm thinking it's going to be something like Fight World or something.
It's like a theme park.
The Fight World does sound like a theme park. Can you help me out with some sort of good fighting pun, perhaps? I would almost love to invoke the idea of like pain or bruising, like Bruise Haven.
Yeah.
Or something.
Bruise Helm.
Or maybe we go German with it and just call it BRÜSHAÜS. HAUS.
BRÜSHAÜS. I like that, actually. Find some creative way to spell bruise as well.
Yeah, why not?
BRÜSHAÜS. Cool. That's a good one.
All right.
Let's move on to our second pitch today. This one's coming from me. I think that you'll like this one a lot, actually. I've been kind of saving it for this one. And I was thinking about the PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. It kind of opened up the doors to this this battle royale type of setting where 100 players are dumped into a map, kind of naked and unequipped, and they have to go and find armor and weapons to try to hunt each other down. And so I was thinking like, oh, what are some interesting spins I can put on that genre?
Yeah.
And I initially thought, oh, it would be kind of neat if it was like a melee only, you know, if you're fighting swords, baseball bats and stuff, so you're not sniped from afar, which would really change the way that you approach people. And I thought, you know, maybe that's not quite interesting enough. What if we say that there is melee combat, but your primary goal is to go golfing. So this is a battle royale golfing game where a bunch of golf balls, just with all the players, are dumped on the battlefield. There's a few holes that you have to scout out and find, and your ultimate goal is to knock all of those balls into the hole, just like you would do in any of the PGA games or Mario Golf or Everybody's Golf. Yeah, it's also, you have to be very careful because people could come up around and whack you on the head with a golf club and steal the shot that you set up.
So you can beat someone with your golf club?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you want to stay hidden. You want to kind of keep to the bushes until you see, until you're able to find those golf balls and get a clear shot. But anyways, let's start the clock and see where we take this.
Well, when I heard you say you were thinking about a spin on PUBG, I thought you and every other major developer on the planet. But this is the spin on PUBG that I am 100% ready to start playing. A golf green, 18 holes or something, is a reasonably large battlefield technically already. So do you imagine like you could have people dropped into all of the golf courses of the world, like those serve as the maps potentially for this thing?
I don't necessarily want them to reflect real golf courses because I do want more hiding places. This is still primarily a game about not being seen in open areas.
Sure.
But you're kind of giving a counter incentive by the rules of golfing that it's easiest to hit a golf ball off of a flat green, which is out in the open. So, you know, if you want a really easy shot, then you're setting up for a risky encounter with whoever could be potentially watching around you. But if you just want to play it safe and just chip away from the bushes, you might get a hole in 12, but, you know, it's better than getting knocked in the head with a golf club.
So how do you imagine, do you just have to sort of play every ball as it lies, or is it more a situation of you can kind of pick up these balls that are on the ground? Maybe, you know, every once in a while you find one, you're like, oh, this is great. This is a shot to, you know, actually
you
play some
definitely
golf.
play them all as they lie. It's like that that Mr. Bean sketch where he's chasing that golf ball all around the city.
Yeah, perfect.
But yeah, so basically the golf balls don't belong to anyone, but as I've been thinking this through, I've been thinking maybe once you hit a golf ball, then you have some sort of like a homing, like a sense of where it is at any given point in time.
Yeah.
So the thing about it is that like the golf balls are fairly hard to see from afar. You know, that encourages people to really be mobile and to move around the map, to potentially put themselves in risky areas to try to find these little white golf balls just kind of stuck in the grass on the map. But once you hit one, I don't want it to just be a case of like, well, there's no hole around me, so I have no reason to hit it, because then someone will just steal my shot and just putt in a really easy hit. So I want to give the people who take those risks early on an advantage, but also, you know, they're the ones that are taking more risks, and anyone could swing by and steal the shot if they get lucky enough to see it in the air.
I don't know. Have you played a lot of PUBG at this point?
No, I've not even gotten into it at all.
Oh, well, this is great, because one of my favorite aspects of PUBG is the naked and afraid phase, obviously, where you're running around and you're really looking for stuff, and you kind of, after playing it for a while, you kind of understand what a okay critical mass of equipment is. And so you're like, okay, I've got my helmet, I've got my vest or whatever, you know, I've got a semi-automatic weapon and something that has some range to it. So you end up understanding how like equipped you need to be. And so I love the idea of potentially everybody is parachuted in, and the things that they're looting around the environment is different golf clubs.
Yeah, exactly.
So like maybe
your 9 irons and your sand wedges and your putters.
Exactly. So if you end up with a ball in the sand and all you've got is this putter, you can kind of just whack away sort of haphazardly. The way people are eliminated is they're murdered.
Potentially, I don't know if I want, I keep going back and forth on that. I don't know if I want it to be like a one-hit kill, you're out for the game, or Because, I mean, if you have 100 players, then that does seem like the best way to do it because you do need to thin those crowds pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But if you're maybe running like a queue of 20, then I guess a respawn after like a 15-second cooldown or something would be a little bit more, just keep it competitive and keep it tense. Because if the goal, because in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, the goal is to be the last surviving member. But in here, the goal is to, I guess, get the best golf score. So
right, exactly.
As you're going on in the battle, if people are permanently dying, then that goal is getting easier. And that's not really the type of curve of intensity curve that I want for each round.
Right. I was thinking that there's probably some, if you are going to have some idea of murder, potentially maybe let's say it takes 20 whacks with a golf club, like some insane amount, so there's a huge time to kill, but if you get a ball in a hole, maybe it like a little box opens up and there's a gun in it. Maybe there's something where like the way to procure the best weapons is actually to golf into, a hole. So like if you're the guy that's able to golf correctly the soonest in the match, then you'll have, you'll be able to put up some big numbers as you kind of, get like a gun with 20 bullets in it, and then literally the bullets are gone, the gun's over. And if you, or maybe maybe it's 10 bullets, it's some small amount of bullets, enough to maybe kill, just 2 or 3 people. And then suddenly you find yourself having to golf again for a weapon. And so if the beginning phase of the game is people getting their clubs and then golfing, you kind of have this like, you're seeing the enemies on the battlefield and there's this gentleman's agreement of like, we're not going to try and beat each other to death because we're both trying to golf to get guns to shoot each other to death.
Yeah, I guess the initial challenge that I went into this with is like find something that's entirely like melee based. And so, as we get back into guns, it starts to kind of drift towards the
actual PUBG again.
Yeah, a kind of a regression towards the mean, as it were. As I want to kind of encourage the golfing to be the primary aspect, I do like to keep the melee attacks fairly lethal so that you are really encouraged to not stand out in the open, because if you know you can take 20 hits, then that's enough time to get off a good golf swing to line it up, even if somebody's actively boshing away at you.
Sure, maybe you could do something where I believe PUBG has some physics that suggest if you are sort of running and melee hit someone, you get far more bang for your buck. Okay. And I love the idea of, because lining up a golf shot can actually take some amount of time. So if you're trying to like literally, 3-point line up and take the shot and just hear, Yeah.
Oh, that's the perfect kind of moment this is built for.
Right, exactly. Like, I was in the middle of my backswing when somebody just cracked me with a 9-iron. Yeah. I really like that. So I'm just trying to figure out, unless the holes are really like, if the ball drops are really evenly distributed to like typical, say, par 4 golf holes, then I think it would really stink to start golfing a golf ball into a direction where I'm not necessarily sure where the hole is.
There should be roughly like one in every direction, so to speak, but you're not going to know exactly where it is unless you kind of scout ahead.
Okay.
One thing that I do want to add to this is that there absolutely should be golf carts scattered across the course that, just like in PUBG, you can run into and you can take the golf cart, and then you have a huge advantage because you're much more mobile, but you're also a lot more visible. So, there's that.
I was also thinking that it would be interesting to have like duos matches where someone is your caddy. Like maybe you're only able to hold 1 or 2 different clubs on yourself at a time, but if you have a caddy with you, they can potentially hold many more clubs for you, but they themselves maybe can't engage in combat. So they're kind of running around
those helpers. I don't remember what they're called. The pawns from Dragon's Dragon's Dogma.
Yes,
Anyways, where
yes,
they're kind
yes.
of like a little subhuman. Not to say anything about people who make caddying a profession, but
No, right.
you know, just being kind of slightly dumb AI, I think would be a fun spin on the situation. But anyways, that's as much fun as this has been. That is enough time spent on this particular game. Let's come up with a name for this.
You could just go for a straight rip of like Golfeunknown's Battlegreens.
Oh, that's very good. I like that. Yeah, I'm keeping that. Yeah, okay. Claiming that as my own. We have one more to go, and of course, this comes from the community. If you would like to submit one of your own and have us tear it to shreds, we're always constructive. We don't ever tear anything down, but we do often change it along the way. We often try to build from what you have in whatever way that we can.
Especially if all you send is a sketch, then we really do a lot of building.
Yes. You can email us at playwrightcast@gmail.com, or you can go to our website, playwrightcast.com/pitch. That'll take you straight to the pitching portal, or just .com to go to our homepage with all of our episodes and a bunch of supplemental material as well. Anyways, this pitch comes from Thomas Ife, who says, a simple pitch for you today, a fighting game where the moveset unlocks when you fulfill certain conditions in a fight trigger specific states, i.e. one fighter has a particularly devastating jump kick, but it only unlocks if you successfully block and counter your opponent X number of times. Should help limit the attack spamming and even give the playing field for newbies versus those powerhouses who make playing online a full-time job. What do you think? This reminds me of a game that we've talked about before. It was something to do with letters. Does that sound familiar? There's some sort of like a letter or word-based fighting game where you're completing 3 or 4 letter words to complete attacks. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yes, we had totally pitched this, and that
My
was
early onset dementia is not helping me now.
Well, we didn't pitch this exact idea, but I think we called it spell check, like button checks.
Yeah.
But
kind of building up your skills as you progress through the fight and kind of gaining more skills and being limited and restricted in certain portions of the fight.
I really love the idea of taking a fighting game, and we've got a lot of death and destruction going into 2018, huh? I love the idea of taking a fighting game and sort of adding on a layer that feels like a MOBA. Essentially, right? Mm-hmm. Where MOBAs have these controlled matches, maybe they're, 20 to 40 minutes. And throughout the course of the match, you go from level 1 through, 10 or whatever. And throughout the match, you're kind of selecting new powers that unlock. So the idea of a fighting game where people have a lot of health, or they're trying to execute particular moves in order to build up and unlock new powers or moves, is really, really cool.
So the challenge that I see there is that if the person who is doing the best is rewarded with more moves, and that's potentially making the already better player even more lethal, which is kind of going against the traditional sense of balancing on the fly. There's the opposite approach of like the Mario Kart way, where the people in last place go a lot faster and get better items and are kind of rubber banded. That always feels a bit cheap as well. And so the only thing that I can really think of off the top of my head, and I would love to be refuted on this and grow my sense of what this could be, but the only thing I can think of off the top of my head is that the new attacks that you're getting are only kind of qualitatively different, like a real lateral step from what you're already able to do, because, then it wouldn't upset the balance, but it also wouldn't really strongly incentivize you to pursue those extra abilities. There's a few, like there's what do they call the X gauge in the Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I think there's some kind of late game or late round bonuses that you can trigger that would make you stronger, that can give you make you faster, it can give you access to stronger moves and such. But I don't know how that works. Just kind of building up your moveset as you go. How does this strike you?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, where if you create a system where you're constantly rewarding the person who does better, it's going to, accelerate that amount of time. But I think if you think of it in a way of person who is playing a certain way is maybe, like you said, has a skill or an ability that makes them change the fighting style. I love the idea of having two distinct fighters that, so many times in fighting games you have like, oh, I'm gonna pick this fighter because they're good at like grappling, they're good at distance or whatever, and take that person and say, okay, well, maybe it doesn't work up, maybe once they lose some amount of life, they start to play in a different way, right? So
Yeah.
it's almost like, I know that I'm going to pick a fighter that has a out the gate advantage, but then as he kind of hits his, 3/4 mark, he is going to become a lot more of a defensive kind of fighter. And then, once I'm down to half, I'm going to have to change and it becomes a lot more advantageous for me to use ranged attacks, or I get a different skill that makes it such that I'm going to be changing the way I play in that phase. And of course, like, you can't really, maybe you can, but in my mind, you wouldn't want to necessarily have this be a span of match time that feels more like 90 seconds and feels probably more like 5 minutes to have a fight with a much more health, so you can have distinct phases, right? Maybe it's such that somebody is so good at a particular phase of a fighter that they're able to defeat everybody in that phase. But I like the idea of, oh, if I can only break this, opponent out of the sort of phase that they're in, or the set of abilities that they have, by getting them just down enough in health, then they'll be forced to play a different way that maybe they're not comfortable playing.
I don't want to ignore, I think the most interesting thing that Thomas brings into this pitch is the idea that you're fulfilling certain conditions to trigger these state changes. So, it's not that you're just fighting and if you're doing well, then you'll get those changes. You're actually pursuing certain, almost like achievement hunting, but in the space of one round. And so that does give you a bit of freedom as to like character development mid-match, which is actually super interesting. If you think about a lot of fighting game tournaments are kind of largely based on tiers. There's an understanding that, Chun-Li can beat this character, but this character can beat Vega. And so you don't want to be, if your opponent selects this character, then you don't want to be this character. And so what if these characters could really branch out in their fighting styles based on what they choose to do? And so if you know that your character is weak to a certain fighting style, then you can try to keep the person from specifically grappling you 3 times, which is what he needs to do to evolve in that specific direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would make a very interesting, like, thinking of it from the lens of Evo.
Yeah,
of
the
like,
metagame.
Exactly. Like, Chun-Li got those 3, throws in, and now she's going to be able to XYZ, and that is, potentially devastating for the opponent or whatever. That's really cool. I think the reason why I went to the phases thing is because I was trying to, work through not giving someone, not necessarily always having it be additive and therefore the person that's doing the best, but maybe, maybe to really get something really good, or something that I believe the technical term would be OPAF.
Yes.
to get
OPAF.
that thing. Yeah. Maybe you have to use a technique or execute a set of things that really means you might be taking it on the chin, right? So now you get the risk reward of, okay, I guess I'm only going to throw high punches because I have to get a certain amount of their health down with high punches. And they have to successfully land, right? So if this person's blocking high punches the whole match, and they know to do that because it's going to stop this person from getting their new ability, that's a really fun way to do it, I think.
Just a certain amount of trying to goad them into letting their defenses down. because you know what they're after as well. So there's a lot of good kind of mental game going on here.
Yeah, I can see the little almost abilities MMO style in little squares or circles underneath my health bar with little meters ticking up every time I successfully do the thing until you see it unlock and everyone, the entire crowd is like, "Oh no, he's got it. He's got the thing," and everybody knows that's the thing that you're able to beat everybody with.
So it would be kind of fun to play as like robots or something that can transform. And so, as you change, like your body is physically changing to these different shapes, and it's a good visual indication that you've made that transition, that you have different abilities now, and it's a good indication for the audiences who are watching on Twitch or in the audience to be able to track the fight a lot cleaner.
It's funny you said robots, because that's exactly where I was thinking in my head of these, like, as they take enough damage, maybe a piece flies off of them and it exposes a gun that you didn't see before, or or they're able to like press a button that was now exposed and activate their shielding that gives them some sort of crazy advantage or something like that.
I always like when, as you're doing worse in a fight, you become more reckless, and, because you have less to lose at that point. It's kind of like in Pokemon, how if you exhaust the points that you need to use any of your moves, then you automatically struggle, which is a kind of medium powerful attack, but it also hurts yourself. And so there's this idea that because the Pokemon is out of things to do, it's just kind of recklessly throwing its body into the ring and just trying to, take whatever bit of the opponent it can while it's still around.
Yeah, and so much of this, I feel like, is flying in the face of, and I think rightfully should, that idea of, I watched EVO for the first time this past year, and the fact that you can, like, hit someone enough for them to become stunned in Street Fighter felt so, like, crazy to me, because I was like, what? This person obviously is already doing better, so it was almost like a countdown until you were able to stun the opponent. And so for someone to be doing really well, and that's why I was thinking about the sort of degrading health system of someone to be doing so well that they know that they're going to trigger something in their opponent to make their opponent more powerful. Perhaps it even would become a strategy, right, to purposely lose your health down to half because you're relying on some ability that is in your skill tree somewhere. So that you're like, okay, well, I'll let them take half, and that's the risk, but I'm going to get this really effective tactic in return.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we're out of time for that one. Thomas comes in with a name for this one. He calls it Kill Tree. It's a pun on skill tree, which I like, so we'll
yes,
keep it.
Very good.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thomas wrote in possible name Kill Tree, and then as almost a little wink in parentheses, as in skill tree. We saw where you're going with that, Thomas. We like it.
Yeah, right. We never mind a good pun name. Anyways, if you would like to send in your pitches, we've already told you where to do that. That is playwrightcast.com, playwrightcast@gmail.com. And we're down to about 4 or 5 left. So, they go up and down. They kind of wax and wane as we put out calls for more community pitches. But if you would like to submit yours now, then it will be read fairly soon in the next couple months or so.
Special thank you to PROTODOME for the use of our theme song, Hello World, off the album Blue Noise. It's very good. Everybody should go check it out.
Very cool. And to take us out of the show today, why don't you give us a miniature idea to make up for the week that you missed last week?
Okay, so the idea is going to be very strange, but I'm going to leave you with this. Boxing Day, but with a UFC spin.
That's great because as an American, I know exactly what Boxing Day entails.
Yes.
All right, well, we'll see you next week.
Bye.